Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week, we're going over UFC Vegas 69, headlined by a women's flyweight matchup between short notice replacement Jessica Andrade, fresh off her victory over Lauren Murphy last month in Brazil. She's taking on rising prospect Blanchfield, who was originally scheduled to fight Tyler Santos, but Santos forced to pull out, and in steps the veteran Jessica Andrade. Very pivotal flyweight matchup there. Obviously, Andrade has been wanting to get another title shot, whether it takes place at strawweight or at flyweight, and she's remaining very active by taking 2 fights in the span of 3 weeks. Very, very impressive. Can't wait to see what she puts on, or at least performance-wise what she puts on. And then on the flip side for Blanchfield, rising prospect, biggest spot in her career thus far, first main event slot as well. So she has a lot to prove, and she has a very stiff test across the cage from her to do it against. We have a couple other interesting matchups throughout the card as well. Very much looking forward to this fight or this event. I believe there's consecutive UFC cards all the way until the end of March now. So strap in, folks, because there's plenty of MMA to ingest over the next couple weeks. Before we get into the breakdowns, obviously a couple of things I like to do, and something that I didn't do in the last 2 podcasts was a recap of the previous event. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it because I haven't been doing the whole unit system or anything like that. Just pretty much focusing on the predictions as of right now. So I just thought I'd at least go over my lock of the night and dog of the night predictions that I've been giving on the Patreon over there. First off, obviously, lock of the night play. I don't mind eating the chalk if it's worth it, and that's exactly what I did with Jack Jenkins. Felt he was a very good spot this past weekend, one of the best spots in terms of a chalk-heavy card. I thought he was one of the safer spots, and he goes out there, puts on a full performance, gets that decision victory. A lot of people expected him to go out there and finish Don because of Don's previous fight against Sadiq Yusuff, but we know that Sadiq way more heavy-handed and much more of a finisher than what Jack Jenkins was going to be able to do in this spot. And Jack goes out there and nearly pitches a clean performance there and gets the win. That increases our lock of the night predictions now to 11-2. That's not just the UFC, but that includes Bellator as well as the regional shows that I do as well. My only 2 losses coming actually on, I believe it was on the regional show, one with Jose Delano in the LFA, and then another one in the LFA with Pablo Sabori, I believe the kid's name was. But UFC Bellator Lock of the Night plays have been flawless thus far in 2023. For the Dog of the Night play, I had Alexander Volkanovski. Close fight. I think a lot of people that were shitting on me in the comment section last week in terms of picking Volkanovski have some apologizing to do. Yes, I didn't get the win, but for a plus 300, Volkanovski put on a tremendous performance and was very close to winning that fight. A minor slip up in that 4th round in terms of not getting up or being more urgent to get back to his feet before Makhachev was able to get that back position and then ride out the rest of the round for 2.5 minutes just on the back of Volkanovski there. But I think Volk got a lot of respect from a lot of people, and even in a loss, I think you can still say that he deserves to be number 1 pound for pound, considering he was the one going up a weight class and still had a tremendous performance. So dog of the night record now for in terms of predictions falls to 5-7 on the year. But again, you're betting underdogs, you're getting underdog money. With the 5-7 record, you're likely still profiting off those dog of the night picks. Like I'm saying, I've been dropping these lock of the night and dog of the night plays or predictions strictly on the Patreon, and that's what I'm going to quickly plug here for you guys. Covering UFC, Bellator, PFL Challenger Series, PFL regular season, whenever that starts as well. The LFA, CFFC, Cage Warriors, and Fury FC all being covered on the Patreon. I believe we have 3 regional shows this weekend. PFL on Friday. Actually, all of these taking place on Friday. PFL, Fury FC, and LFA. Luckily, if you're on the Patreon, you're getting breakdowns for every single one of those matchups. And so you can either take that information, bet on it, or bet against it. The choice is up to you, but I will do my due diligence in terms of doing all the research required to give you as much information as possible and give you a educated prediction on how those fights are going to play out. Link in the description below. Check out the Patreon. Appreciate all the love and support that people have continuously been dropping over there. All right, without further ado, let's get right into the breakdowns for UFC Vegas 69. Kicking things off in the flyweight division, we got 6-0 Clayton Carpenter going up against the returning 4-1 Juan Camilo Ronderos. Now, starting off on the Carpenter side, he earned his contract with the UFC off of the Contender Series, off of a very impressive performance over Edgar Chairez. He came in as a pretty hefty favorite in that matchup. I believe it was around that minus 250 range, because he showcased that he's a great all-around fighter on his regional tape. He has great striking, great discipline, and throws in combinations, but he does his best work when he is able to get his opponents to the ground and grind them out from on top. He is actively looking for finishes, but never compromises his position by trying to get a finish. So he just stays very calm, cool, and collected, and just waits for opportunities to show themselves so that he can take advantage. In the grappling realm, like I said, that's where he showcases his best work, but he stays very safe even in the striking realm, as he showcased on the Contender Series against a very dangerous Edgar Chairez. Chairez hurt him in the early goings of that matchup, but we saw that discipline and ability to battle back from adversity from Carpenter, as he managed to still fight through that, getting hurt early, and then just implementing his game plan for the rest of the fight, getting his hand raised via decision. Very promising prospect out of the MMA lab. I have high hopes for Clayton Carpenter, and I think the UFC is matching up very well in his first fight in the UFC. On the flip side, for Juan Camilo Ronderos, he's coming off of a lengthy suspension that's kept him out of the cage since May 2021. That night, he went up against David Dvorak on short notice and got, made quick work of, as David Dvorak was able to hurt him and then eventually get a rear naked choke finish to get that win. But Ronderos, still, I don't want to call him super green because he only has 5 professional MMA fights, but we saw in his 4th professional MMA fight that he went up against a tested veteran in Eric Shelton on the regional scene, former UFC fighter himself. Ronderos was able to go, a full 25 minutes against him in a very competitive matchup, especially in the grappling realm where both guys had a lot of success. Personally, I thought Eric Shelton deserved to get his hand raised that night, as I thought he got the more dominant positions, but I will give Ronderos the benefit of the doubt, considering he's the one mainly landing all the damage, even though he was the one in the compromising positions. But that's Ronderos' game. He is the one normally going out there and dragging opponents to the ground, putting them through the ringer, either grinding them to a decision or seeking a finish of some sort. But I've also seen him get grinded out and put into bad positions and battle back from adversity himself. The fight against Matthew Elliott, I thought he was losing pretty much 99% of that fight before he got that weird arm bar. It was kind of like a scarf hold arm bar from a very weird position, but he actually broke his opponent's arm or snapped his opponent's arm with that submission to get the win. But that was a fight where he snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, essentially. He trains with Extreme Couture, solid fighter all around, but he needs to get his grappling going to have much success because his striking somewhat limited in my opinion. Very reckless with his when he crashes the pocket. He's always the one at a height and reach disadvantage, but luckily he's a good enough grappler that he can take away the height and reach advantage of his opponents when he's able to get fights to the ground. I've only seen him utilize his grappling against lower levels of opponents, but I like the technique and tenacity I see him doing it with. Again, the Eric Shelton win, the biggest of his career, showcasing that he can be competitive, but I just don't know how he's going to do against better opponents, and that's what he's facing this weekend in Clayton Carpenter. This is a very exciting matchup for me because I think that we're going to see a lot of grappling in this matchup. Ronderos very aggressive with his grappling, like I said, and I think that's going to cause Carpenter maybe a little bit of issues in the early going, but I do think that Carpenter will be the overall better fighter here. I think he's the better striker of the two. I think he can keep up with that pace that Ronderos is going to look to put on here, and I think we'll see Carpenter get the better positions. I think we'll see him win the scrambles, and I think he'll eventually be the stronger opponent in these, or the stronger fighter in these scrambling and transitional stages of those grappling scenarios that we're going to see. And then on the feet, I do think that Carpenter puts together a better striking game. He's cleaner with his shots, throws in combinations, has a good kicking game as well, and I think that's going to cause Ronderos some issues in this matchup. I like the over at plus money as well. I think that's a good spot or a good place to target this matchup, as I think some people are expecting Carpenter to go out there and just starch Ronderos to kick things off here. But I think that we'll see Ronderos get in on the hips, and then I think that's going to start some grappling exchanges, which I think will continue throughout this matchup. Carpenter has some finishes on his regional record, but I don't think it's really coming against the highest level of competition. And although Ronderos is still pretty new in his professional MMA career, given that this is going to be his 6th professional MMA fight, I think he's durable. I think the David Dvorak fight is not a good indication of what to expect from Ronderos moving forward. He can be competitive in certain matchups, but I do think that Carpenter will be the one getting the better of the striking, and then once they inevitably clinch up with each other, I think that Carpenter will be able to get the better positions, land the takedowns, get some control time, and get his hand raised via decision in this matchup. So over 2.5 plus money, I like it, but I do think that Carpenter is the one going to get it, will be the one to get his hand raised here via decision. Next up, we got a welterweight bout between 9-2 AJ Fletcher going up against 10-3 UFC debutant Themba Gorimbo. Starting off on the Fletcher side, he is winless in the UFC thus far, going 0-2 since earning his contract on the Contender Series with a beautiful flying knee. He was a very explosive and athletic fighter, as he showcased on the regional scene, being able to take his opponents to the ground and just dominate them from on top with his big power. However, he's fallen on hard times as he's gone 0-2 against Matthew Semmelsberger and Ange Lusa last time around. And I think what's showcasing the most in those fights is his lack of striking defense. He doesn't move his head very much, and his footwork is very much stalkerish in terms of just moving forward and looking to break his opponent with his forward pressure. And although he had very good success in that second round of hurting Ange Lusa, it seemed like he just struggled in terms of getting his game going. He exerted way too much energy in that matchup, starting to slow down later, which is why Lusa was able to have success in that third round and win that fight by decision. But I think that when Fletcher can get his grappling game going, just as he showed glimpses of brilliance in that fight against Matthew Semmelsberger, that's where he is best. He doesn't train out of any high-level gym or anything like that. I believe he's still out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But you see that the reason he likely had a lot of success on the regional scene was due to his physicality and athleticism. A lot of opponents were not able to match him in that, and obviously they got steamrolled because of it. But we see this with UFC newcomers all the time. They are either very powerful or very explosive in the early goings of their professional MMA careers. They make it to the UFC, and then they just fight guys that are technically much better than them, and they're not able to allow their physicality or lean on their physicality to get their wins anymore. But Fletcher, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's starting to learn that he has to add more to his game and at least go back to his bread and butter of his grappling to get his hand raised. So he might still have a couple wins left up his sleeve. It's just how he implements a game plan and sticks to it moving forward. On the flip side, for the debuting Themba Gorimbo, he comes to us only off of one win. He was the former EFC champion. He made the switch over to North America recently, had his debut for Fury FC in North America, and utilized an approach that many opponents have had success against him with, and that was with grappling. In the past, Gorimbo focused on an aggressive jiu-jitsu guard against lesser opponents where he's been able to pull off submissions. On the feet, a little bit over-aggressive and really not bringing his feet with him when he's striking, which causes him to overextend, and opponents were able to change levels and get him to the ground and grind him out. That's where he seems to struggle the most, is with his takedown defense. If he can't keep fights in the stand-up range, or if he's not the one getting the takedowns, he struggles off of his back. And again, he'll start off with a couple of submission attempts off of his back, but he starts to break as fights start to go on, and especially when fighters are able to settle in that top position, start chipping away at him, and then just continue to grind on him over the course of 15 minutes. I'm not the highest on Gorimbo anymore. I expected to be high on him for some reason, but I just really couldn't get behind his game, considering all the flaws I see in it, especially with his lack of ability to get off of his back when he is taken down. And again, his wild and reckless striking style leads to him getting taken down. You see so many times where he's just overextending, not really keeping his feet under him, and that allows his opponents to change levels effortlessly and get him to the mat. So I wouldn't get our hopes too high on this, what I thought was a highly touted prospect. A lot of people were talking a lot about Gorimbo, but personally, I'm not super impressed. And this seems to be a very tough stylistic matchup that he has ahead of him in his UFC debut. I was expecting to be a little bit more impressed with Gorimbo when I went to do his tape studying, like I said, but I think that Fletcher is a good enough matchup here that Fletcher can finally get his hand raised inside the octagon. Obviously, picked up that win on the Contender Series, but has gone 0-2 thus far. This is a great stylistic matchup for him. I believe he will be able to crash the pocket here. I believe he'll be able to get a hold of Gorimbo and drag this fight to the ground. Gorimbo, like I said in his breakdown, I'm not the biggest fan of his striking because he doesn't really stay under himself. He very much extends a lot, overextends to the point that his opponents can change levels and get this fight to the ground or get fights to the ground. And that's where he shows the most trouble. That's where Fletcher on the regional scene has shown very good skills, is when he is able to get opponents to the ground. He can grind them out, find that dominant position, and potentially get them out of there. Gorimbo is aggressive off of his back, like I've said, but I think that Fletcher will do a good enough job in terms of staying safe in the early goings. It's when this gets into the deeper rounds that I think that Gorimbo could have some success off of his back with the aggressive guard that he has. But I think that Fletcher will stay composed. He'll be able to manage his gas tank well by being able to suck wind while being on top of Gorimbo and just grinding him out in this matchup. I'm a little bit skeptical about his striking defense. Like I said, his lack of head movement gives me a lot of pause, but I do think his durability will pay off for him here so that he can crash that pocket, land some shots of his own, but eventually drag this fight to the ground where he'll be able to grind on Gorimbo for the majority of 15 minutes to get his hand raised via decision in this matchup. Look for AJ Fletcher to get his first win in the octagon, like I said, by grinding out Gorimbo here and getting his hand raised by decision. Next up in the lightweight division, we got Nazim Sadykhov coming in at 7-1, going up against a fighter with another 7-1 record, Evan Elder. Starting off on the Sadykhov side, he hails out of the famed Serra-Longo gym in Long Island, New York, and it looks to be a very solid prospect. He has yet to lose a fight since his professional MMA debut, where he got choked out by his opponent, but since then has rattled off 7 straight victories en route to eventually making it to the UFC. He throws in solid combinations and gets flashy at certain points in his fights when he gets comfortable, but his grappling is quite impressive with his ability to time his entries and get these takedowns. However, I'm not completely sold on his takedown game or his overall game, considering the lack of competition that he's been going up against during this entire run. He's fighting, very low-level guys, and obviously he's a victim of, only being able to fight the guys that are put in front of him and not really fighting at the highest level as of yet. But I think that a lot of his skill set might be exaggerated because of the lack of competition that he's been going up against. But good power in his hands, good flashy striking techniques at times, and he does a good job in terms of transitioning from position to position when he is able to get fights on the ground. But I wonder the effectiveness of his game considering the lack of quality opponents that he's been going up against. That's kind of my big holdup in this matchup. I could see him getting outstruck by far superior technical strikers. I could see him getting outgrappled by better technical wrestlers and technical grapplers. But again, I might be being a little bit too harsh on him considering how young he is still in his career. But just some things to keep in mind considering, his run, his record, and the level of competition he's been facing in the past. But he has the tools. It's just how it looks against competent competition. On the flip side, for Evan Elder, he came into the UFC on short notice going up against Preston Parsons, and he had a valiant effort in a loss there where he landed some big shots on the feet to really hurt Parsons a couple times, but it was ultimately the strong grappling game of Parsons to be able to get the fight to the ground, get some close submission opportunities, and we saw Elder showcase some very good patience and discipline by working out of those close submission attempts, getting back to his feet, and getting back to his handiwork. That's where he is best, is when he's throwing in combinations, digging to the body and landing good output and volume, especially with power in almost every single strike that he throws. He's very athletic, he's very strong, and he moves very well, has a lot of explosiveness. I love the fact that he's training with the Killcliff FC guys, because you got to believe that they're rounding out the rest of his game very well too. His takedown defense could use a little bit of work, but I am impressed with his ability to get back to his feet and get back to his handiwork where he's able to knock out the majority of his opponents. I like what we see from him. He seems like he has some solid potential as well, but it depends on how he can deal with the other guys that are going to be looking to relentlessly take him to the ground. And if he can continuously work back to his feet, he always gives himself a chance to win because his striking is something that needs to be respected by his opponents. This was a tricky matchup for me to really pick a side on. Sadykhov, his level of competition has been very weak, and I think that's going to play into this fight with Evan Elder. Elder, not a title contender by any means, but I think that his striking style could give Sadykhov some issues here. And if Sadykhov's not able to land takedowns, I think Elder can do a good enough job of keeping the pressure on him, landing those combinations, digging to the body, and just very much mixing up the targets of his striking. And I think that will give Sadykhov some issues. I think that'll cause Sadykhov to slow down here, and I think his takedown approach is going to start to dwindle as this fight starts to go on. Mix in the Kill Cliff FC angle for the Elder side. Gotta believe that he's going to be prepared for the full 50 minutes should he need it. I liked what I saw from him even on short notice in his UFC debut against Preston Parsons, who I believe is a stronger and much better with his top pressure than what Sadykhov has shown. Sadykhov probably better in terms of getting to dominant positions, but I think that pressure that Preston Parsons has shown from that top control, it would have been tougher for Elder to deal with compared to what he's going to have to deal with here with Sadykhov. I lean Elder ever so slightly. I think this should be closer to a 50-50 matchup, but I think that a finishing opportunity will eventually open itself up for one of these fighters. I lean more so on the Elder side, who's going to be able to land those clean shots, dig to the body, bring that guard down of Sadykhov, and then end up with the big shot up top. And then on the flip side for Sadykhov, he might be able to find that finishing position on the ground should he be successful from that top position. Again, not a whole lot of confidence on this matchup. I do lean more so with the better striker here, in my opinion, who is Elder. Like Sadykhov might be a little bit more diverse with the striking skills and a little bit flashier, but I think that forward-moving pressure of Elder, mixing up the targets and being this more powerful puncher of the two will benefit him in this matchup. So with a little bit of confidence, I'll be going on the Evan Elder side here, and I think he comes through with a knockout victory probably in the second round of this matchup. Next up, we got a light heavyweight matchup here between Ovince St. Preux coming in with a 26-16 record. He's going up against Philippe Lins, who comes in with a 15-5 record. Starting off with the Ovince St. Preux side of things. He's been trying to fight Philippe Lins for a while now, but I'm glad that they're finally able to get it going this weekend. It was a very lackluster performance from OSP last time around when he defeated Shogun Rua by split decision. He just chose to play a kicking game from the outside where he kept Shogun Rua at bay, very rarely and scarcely used his hands, but he just relied on his teep kick up the middle and just a kicking game overall, along with staying on his bicycle the entire time. I'm not scared if he was, I'm not sure if he was scared of getting gassed out and possibly being finished in the latter half of that fight, but it was very underwhelming to see the approach that he took in that fight. He's turning 40 in April, so it's pretty certain that we can say that he's in the twilight of his career at this point in time, and he likely will continue just to be a gatekeeper of that top 10 of this division. He's not really showcasing what he has been when he was in the heyday of his career with his big power, ability to get guys to the ground and dominate them from on top, finding submission opportunities for himself. Even the Von Preux choke that people like to call him now or allude to nowadays. Not really what we're liking from OSP nowadays in terms of his lack of cardio, lack of ability to manage his gas tank, and then just lack of ability to be aggressive. He allows opponents to just get ahead of him in the early goings of fights, and if he's not able to catch up later on because of how gassed he is, more often than not, he ends up going on to lose his fights. The part of his game outside of his teeps and his kicks that I like the most is that lead left hook of his. He does such a good job, even while moving backwards, to land that lead left hook with his lead hand. Obviously, that's a little bit redundant to say, but he catches a lot of opponents that are reckless on the way in because it's just so sneaky and it's so sharp and has a lot of power on it that he's been able to knock out a couple of opponents. He knocked out Shogun Rua with it in their first matchup, and he even knocked out Alonzo Menafield with it because of Alonzo's recklessness when he closed that distance. He still has that. Power is usually the last thing to leave an opponent, but St. Preux, he can lean on that if he needs to, but I think that if he can put together an overall game, he'll still end up coming out on the losing end of most of his fights. On the flip side, for Philippe Lins, this is going to be his second fight at light heavyweight in the UFC, and it worked out well for him last time around, getting that decision victory over Marcin Prachnio. He was having a tough time at heavyweight, losing his first 2 UFC fights to Andrei Arlovsky, and the other fight, which is actually skipping my mind at this moment in time. Let me just quickly pull it up here. I should have had this ready to go. That is the unfortunate nature of the recording game. Tanner Boser. It was the Tanner Boser fight where Boser got his first finish in the UFC by just thwarting Philippe Lins and absolutely starching him in that fight. I believe he put him out cold from what I remember as well. But Lins, made up for that performance with that win over Marcin Prachnio last time, where he showcased good forward pressure, mixing it up in the clinch when he needed to, landing takedowns when he needed to, but also putting that power on Prachnio when he needed to. I think he could be successful at light heavyweight. If he's safe with this sometimes reckless approach to crashing the pocket, he can use his strength, his ability to get fights to the ground, and utilizing his patience on the feet to find those openings that he needs to land the big shots of his own and land the more significant strikes, or at least the more impactful strikes in the judge's eyes, to get his hands raised by decision. I like his overall game still, and I think he still has a lot to offer for this light heavyweight division. Just can he keep his durability in check? That's my big question mark, especially against the slightly faster light heavyweights he's going to be going up against now. But Lens, again, former PFL champion, $1 million winner for their heavyweight division. Let's see if he can get it done in the light heavyweight division for the UFC. I give him a good shot of doing so. It's weird how often the UFC has tried to put this matchup together. It reminds me of Shamil Abdurakhimov against Jilton Almeida, a fight that fell through numerous times, and this fight fell through twice before, and now they're finally, knock on wood, I'm recording this on Monday of fight week. Hopefully they can settle the score here and actually step in the cage and have the cage door lock behind them so they can finally throw down. I lean a little bit to the Philippe Lins side here. My only issue is that sometimes he's a little bit reckless when he closes the pocket, and that fadeaway lead left hook from Ovin St. Preux could be live here to clip Lins and put him out in this spot. But I like the grinding style that we've been seeing from Lins, even down a weight class here at light heavyweight. I think now that he's going to start to get that weight cut down a little bit better, he's a little bit up there in age as well, but I think that we'll see a good improvement from him here dealing with the lengthy style of Ovin St. Preux. St. Preux could have some success with that teep kick up the middle and trying to keep Philippe Lins at range, but I think we'll see Philippe close the distance and crash the pocket enough to push him up against the cage, drain that gas tank of Ovin St. Preux, maybe even land a couple takedowns of his own and really do some damage from on top. So I'll lean with the former heavyweight. I guess OSP was a former heavyweight as well, but spending the majority of his career at light heavyweight. I think that Lins will be the stronger of the two here, be able to get the positions that he needs to, and as long as he doesn't get a little bit overzealous in terms of crashing that pocket and evading that lead left hook of Ovin St. Preux, he should be able to, grind on him, land some good enough damage, and then win this fight over 15 minutes, eventually getting his hand raised in the spot by decision. So official prediction here, Philippe Lins, not so hot on his chalky price tag, but I think he gets the job done via decision in this matchup. Next up in the featherweight division, we got 18-6 Jamal Emmers going up against highly touted prospect 23-0 Hussein Askhabov. This is a very intriguing fight. And starting off on the Jamal Emmers side, this is a guy that has all the skills in the world, but it just seems that sometimes he makes fight IQ mistakes. There's the Julian Erosa fight where he had great success in that first round, utilizing his grappling, and then for some reason going out there and willingly engaging in a striking battle with the better striker, and he ends up getting knocked out for his efforts. In the Giga Chikadze fight, had some grappling success, but then played around on the feet a little bit too much, losing to the better striker in that moment in time. And then last time around, had great success on the feet against Pat Sabatini, and I don't fault him for following Sabatini to the ground when he had originally hurt him, because he did get dominant positions and was close to finishing him there, but then he hung around on the feet a little bit too much, allowed Sabatini to get his wits back about him, and then he tried to play footsies with the better jiu-jitsu players and got his shit torn up because of it. That's the qualms and the holdups that I have with Jamal Emmers. He has all the tools in the world to be a top 15 to top 10 fighter, but he just makes some poor decisions at times. He's a slick striker on the feet, utilizing his speed and his agility and his length to really land his straight shots down the middle, and we saw it on full display when he was able to defeat Pat Sabatini. And then when he needs his grappling, we saw it on display against Vince Cachero as well, just outstriking him from distance. But he also has a good wrestling game and grappling game should he need it. Just don't do it against better jiu-jitsu players like he did against Pat Sabatini. I like what Jamal Emmers brings to the table, and I'm still willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just don't know if I wouldn't attach myself to him if he was a big favorite, but at underdog odds, he seems to be very intriguing, especially going up against a relatively unproven prospect in Hussein Askhabov. Askhabov, like I said earlier, 23-0 prospect, and people might shit on me for saying he's unproven, but man, I'm really not impressed with the level of competition and opponents that he's been going up against on the regional scene. A lot of these guys are much older or they don't have enough experience, and they seem to have very poor takedown defense, which is where Askhabov can just seem to rely on if he doesn't feel like things are going well on the feet for him. On the feet, he's very reckless and throws a lot of wide winging shots, and he throws with a lot of speed and power, so I get why he's able to get away with it. But there are instances where he has been getting clipped by guys on the way in, or he has been given up bad positions on the ground and has been able to get controlled by a select few of guys, right? Like Donovan Desme is probably the one guy that had the most success against Askhabov, but he was the most formidable opponent that Askhabov has gone up against in his 23-fight run. Jamal Emmers is going to be a massive step up for him, so I'm intrigued to see whether that style of Askhabov is going to pay off here. He might have some success on the feet because of his speed, but I think he might get touched up by the straighter shots down the middle. But his wrestling, how good is it really? It looks good. He has great throws. He has great trips. He has good timing on his takedowns. I just don't know how it's going to look against higher levels of competition, and that's the holdup that I have here. Like I said earlier, we're finally getting the long-awaited debut of Hussein Askhabov here, and I'm very intrigued about how he actually matches up with Jamal Emmers. Now, Askhabov has a very good record of 23-0, like I was saying, but I very much question the level of competition that he was going up against, and I believe that Jamal Emmers is a huge step up for him. Emmers' length and speed and wrestling background will allow him to keep this fight in a place that he could be very comfortable. As I said in Emmers' breakdown, though, I'm very sketchy of his fight IQ. I've backed him in a couple of spots, gone against him in other spots, and he's really not stuck to a game plan that is beneficial for him. As the Julian Erosa fights, like I was talking about, and that's kind of what gives me pause in really being confident in him in this spot. Although Askhabov has 23 professional fights, I believe Emmers has been going up against a much tougher and stiffer competition and has more validity to the experience that he's accrued in the MMA cage to this point in time. I do think that Askhabov will struggle to keep this fight on the mat, and I think he'll even struggle as this fight wears on to get this fight to the mat. And then in the striking realm, I think Emmers, with his length and his speed, will be able to pick apart Askhabov with his straighter shots down the middle from range as Askhabov recklessly closes the distance with his big overhand rights. I like his kicking game, but I do think he's going to struggle to close that distance against the bigger and longer Jamal Emmers in the spot. So I lean Emmers. I think Emmers pitches a decent performance here, maybe lands a takedown or two of his own, gets a good amount of control time, as we've seen Askhabov controlled in the past against lesser opponents. And I think Emmers is going to go out there and give Askhabov his first ever loss. So give me Emmers via decision. Next up, we got a women's bantamweight bout here between 10-7 Lena Lansberg. She's going up against 9-2-1 Mayra Bueno Silva. Now, Lena Lansberg has put together a 4-6 record in the UFC since making her debut to fight Chris Cyborg. A lot of people expected Lansberg to fizzle out, but she's been managing to get a couple wins in the UFC at opportune times so that she can stay relevant enough so that the UFC does not cut her. Her biggest win, obviously, over Macy Chiasson, where she was able to expose Chiasson for being more so of a, Chiasson very much leaned on her physicality in a lot of her early fights to bully her opponents to get her wins. But Lansberg was able to rough her up in the clinch with some beautiful knees and showcasing her patented elbow queen style by cutting up Macy Chiasson in the clinch positions, showcasing that she was a very violent fighter. But now, she's 41 years old, or at least she'll be turning 41 in March, and we're seeing that she's starting to slow down in her performances. She did have a bright moment against Pannie Kianzad 2 fights ago where she hurt her, but Kianzad was able to get her composure back, eventually battle back and win that fight via decision. But Lansberg is just getting outworked. And if you can outnumber her and outwork her or even land bigger shots on her, she will more than likely wilt in those spots. She is, she was a fun fighter, but I just don't think that she has much really left to offer the UFC, and it really wouldn't surprise me if she ended up hanging the gloves up if she ends up losing this fight this weekend. On the flip side, from Mayra Bueno Silva, she's 7 fights into her UFC career, but I'm still questioning, how good she actually is. I have question marks in terms of, just because of her style, it's a little flimsy for me. She's very aggressive off her back whenever she gets taken down, but there are times where she has been grinded out from on top when she's not able to get the submission. She doesn't chase takedowns often, as through her 7 UFC fights, she's only attempted 1 takedown. I'd like to see her be a little bit more aggressive with it because she showcases that she has a very aggressive BJJ game, and I would love to see what it looks like if she's able to get that top position. What she mainly relies on is a jab and a low kick, and she stays consistent enough with it at times to really stifle her opponent and land the bigger and more impactful shots, just as she did against Yinan Wu. But I think the power is what she relies on a lot, and that could be the reason why she is just so conservative at times, because she's waiting for that big opportunity where she can land that big power, hurt her opponent, make it look good for the judges, and even if she's not able to get the finish, it's enough for the judges to be like, okay, maybe she got outstruck, but she was the one landing the better, more impactful strikes, so let's give the round to her. So again, this is going to be her 8th UFC fight, and I'm hoping that we get some more relevant data on her in this matchup, but I've just never been a big person in terms of chasing the chalk on her, given her somewhat conservative striking or fighting style at times. But she's a fun fighter. She's aggressive with the power that she throws, and look for her to utilize that low leg kick to set up the rest of her striking game to unleash that power and really use that to be the reason that she sets herself apart from her opponent, especially in the judges' eyes. I'm always sketched out with the Mayra Bueno Silva side of things because, she makes fights a lot closer than they should be. And Lena Lansberg, decent enough striker, maybe if she's able to get the output out there, she could keep this fight close with Bueno Silva. However, I think it's going to be the youth, speed, and agility and power of Bueno Silva that should allow her to get this win, and possibly in dominant fashion, whether it comes from a club and sub situation or from an ability to just club her and get that drum going and get the ground and pound victory. I think Bueno Silva will be landing big enough shots to eventually drop Lansberg, who again very much is on the decline of her career, on the back end of her career. And even though she had some success against Carol Hossa, I think the majority of that was just due to landing one big shot. And I think that's what's going to cause her to struggle here from Silva, who does a good job of maintaining that distance, does a good job of also stalking her opponent, but using her kicks, her low leg kicks, and that jab, I think she'll be able to keep Lansberg on the outside long enough to eventually open up that big strike that she can land to drop Lena Lansberg here and get her hand raised by finish. I lean the under 2.5 more than I do the chalky Silva price tag, but I do think that Silva gets her hand raised here, and I think it comes via finish. I'm going to say Silva via club and sub, probably second round in this matchup. So Bueno Silva, second round submission. Next up, we got a lightweight fight on our hands here. We got 35-16 Jim Miller taking on short notice replacement Alexander Hernandez, who comes in with a 13-6 record. This is a historic fighter here in Jim Miller in terms of the records that he holds with the UFC. Right now, all-time UFC records that he holds, 40 total fights puts him in number one, 24 total wins, and 46 submission attempts. In regards to the lightweights division specifically, where he spent pretty much all of his career, he holds records in most fights at 37, most wins at 21, most finishes at 14, and most fight time with 6 hours, 3 minutes, and 59 seconds of octagon time. His name is also riddled throughout the top 10 of other records, whether it's lightweight or just all-time UFC, no matter the division. And you got to believe that he'll likely be entered into the Hall of Fame once he decides to hang up his gloves. But right now, he's on a 3-fight winning streak, and 2 of those against younger opponents that people expected to, use their youth to their advantage to get their hand raised. But Miller's durability and hard-nosed approach has kept him very active and winning enough to stick around with the biggest promotion in the world. He stays very active from that southpaw stance with his jab and his ability to use that inside leg kick to just keep his opponents thinking about what's coming his way. But he damages that lead leg of his opponent so often, just as he showcased in the Nicholas Mota fight, where he kept using it and then eventually uncorked a bomb to the head, which eventually put Nicholas Mota down and out. We saw him pick up a win over Donald Cowboy Cerrone last time around, which is a win that he avenged from Cowboy beating him years and years ago, but he was able to capitalize on a small slip-up that Cowboy had, latch onto that neck, and take home that guillotine choke victory. He's very durable. The last time I believe he was finished was against Dan Hooker way back in the day. I believe that was in 2017 or 2018. But his durability has held up, and he's been able to really push the fight against a lot of these opponents. I still like what I see from Jim Miller, and he's still a tough out for a lot of opponents. Keep your eye on him because he could still go out there and pull off some upsets when he needs it. On the flip side, for Alexander Hernandez, his featherweight experiment didn't really go as planned against Billy Q last time around. He made the weight, but I think even if that fight took place at lightweight, he still would have lost. Billy Q was just a very bad matchup for Alexander Hernandez, so I'm not going to give him too much flack for that. The downfall of Hernandez's career seems to be his lack of ability to have a solid gas tank or at least manage it well, but I think that also comes from the pace and pressure of the opponents that have been able to defeat him. Like Renato Moicano, sticking with him in the striking realm and really putting the pressure on him in that second round to get that finish. And Billy Q, that's his MO. That's his game. He, has close fights in the early goings, but then he weaponizes his cardio and drains and finishes opponents late. That's why he beat Alexander Hernandez, and that's why he was the favorite going into that fight, even with the physicality and athletic advantages Hernandez had going into that fight. I think Hernandez, his power and his strength will allow him to dictate where fights can take place, and that could be a benefit for him in this matchup. So, I like Hernandez. I like the fact that he had partnered up with Factory X, even though it hasn't been going his way over the last couple of fights. But I think he's one of those fighters that is going to have a permanent roster spot, essentially, with the UFC. Flip-flopping wins, maybe getting a 2 or 3 fight winning streak going, and then losing a fight or two. But just off of his physicality alone, I think that Hernandez will always be in the UFC and a fighter that will always provide tough opposition for opponents that aren't able to Billy Q him or Renato Moicano him. I think that this is a great short notice opportunity for Alexander Hernandez. He has all the advantages in terms of the physical traits here, right? He's the faster of the two, much more powerful, has way more explosivity, and I think that would allow him to get the positions that he needs here against Jim Miller, whether it's landing takedowns, as we've seen Jim Miller a little bit too comfortable off of his back at times. I think Hernandez's power will allow him to get the positions that he needs. I think he'll get that respect of Jim Miller, and this could go one of two ways for Hernandez. Either he starts as Jim Miller right off the bat, or he uses his strength against him, pushes him up against the cage, starts to slow Jim Miller down, drag him to the mat, and just grind on him. We've seen Alexander Hernandez's gas tank be his problem in the past, and Jim Miller, if he can get that early respect for Hernandez, could potentially set a pace to slow down Hernandez and eventually take over later. But I think that we'll see Hernandez get that respect from Jim Miller early on in this matchup, grind on him against the cage, and just be the better overall fighter. I'm not the hottest on his price tag here, as Jim Miller is a very durable fighter, is a guy that never really quits on himself. So if Hernandez does start to weaken a little bit, if this fight goes into deep waters, Jim Miller could absolutely find a position to get the finish as well. But I lean Hernandez. Again, I can't really settle on a method of victory here. I'm going to ultimately, with very low confidence, say that he wins this by decision with a lot of grappling, a lot of control time, and then staying safe when he is able to get this fight to the ground, or he can just get that quick knockout victory in the early going of this matchup. But yeah, it's going to be tough for me to settle on a method of victory, but I will lean on the Alexander Hernandez side here. And just for the sake of the podcast, I'll go via decision. Next up, we got a light heavyweight matchup between 11-4 William Knight and 15-6 Marcin Prachnio. Starting off on the William Knight side of things, it seems like the cat is out of the bag from what to expect from William Knight in almost every fight. He doesn't throw a lot of output, and it seems like he very much relies on his knockout power early, or he tries to overwhelm you with his strength, but his inability to manage his gas tank has usually been the reason he loses his fights. I don't think that he has a lot to offer outside of round one, and I think a lot of his win condition relies on him getting that early knockout. If he can't, then I think that's where we see opponents start to take over, possibly finish him late in fights, similar to what Devin Clark was able to do, but even get him into bad positions where he just struggles to get out of it, like he did against Dawoon Young, continuously getting taken down over and over again. One thing I'll always remember about William Knight is he actually fought on the card that I went to the Apex for when he fought Fabio Charant. And, you know, the Apex is a very cool atmosphere to watch the fights in. But the best thing about it is the hearing the kicks and punches and all that landing. And the biggest strike that I heard that entire night was one of the body kicks that William Knight landed in the beginning or the first minute or two of that matchup. It only lasted 4 minutes, but it was very quick. It was at least 2 minutes into that fight that he landed a beautiful body shot with his kick, and it just resonated throughout the entire Apex there. Getting back to his fighting style, again, he beat Alonzo Menefield, which is the biggest win of his career, but I believe almost everybody agrees that that was an egregious decision that should have gone Alonzo Menefield's way. I don't think William Knight has a big or high ceiling at all. I think he relies too much on his early physical capabilities and his explosions to get his wins, because if he can't get that early going, then he's kind of screwed, in my opinion. On the Marcin Prachnio side, he's coming off that loss to Philippe Lins, and I don't think a lot of people expected him to be in the UFC for that long, especially considering that he started his UFC career 0-3, getting finished in the first round by every single opponent. But luckily for him, the UFC gave him another shot against a power puncher in Khalil Rountree, and he did a great job of utilizing his kick-heavy style and his movement and staying on the outside and keeping Khalil at distance just off of kicks and movement alone. I think that's probably the biggest part of his game is his ability to use that karate style and just kick his opponents from distance, and then trying to unload with his hands when he feels that he is at a perfect range to take advantage of a slip up from his opponent. I just don't know how far Prachnio will really go in the UFC. I think that some opponents are going to be able to clip his chin and put him out. And, you know, he's shown some decent durability improvements over his last couple of fights compared to what he showcased in his first 3 UFC fights. But I think it's just a matter of time before he ends up getting clipped by a fast, explosive, quick fighter that is able to get to his chin. Philippe Lins wasn't that guy. Khalil Rountree seemed demoralized with that kicking game that Prachnio was imploring or implying. I just wasn't really overly impressed with what we saw from Prachnio over his last couple fights. So look for him to lean on that stick and move style with his kicks to find some success. I just don't think that's going to take him very far in this UFC light heavyweight division. I really thought I'd have more confidence in Prachnio going into this matchup, but seeing how often he was getting clipped by Philippe Lins gives me some pause that William Knight has that knockout power that he could potentially catch Prachnio in the early goings of this fight. The best way to possibly approach this would be to live bet Prachnio after round 1. As we've seen William Knight very much slow down in fights, and you see the majority of his knockout power very much start to dwindle. I think Prachnio's footwork and karate style stance, if he can stay on his bicycle enough, should be able to keep him safe in the early goings of this matchup. Use the style that he used against Khalil Rountree from distance, kicking William Knight over and over again, keeping him at bay, and then doing a good enough job in terms of defensively staying away from William Knight. The size advantage of Prachnio will allow him to stay safe in this matchup. Hopefully, as long as his gas tank is able to survive over the 15 minutes. I like the over 1.5 as well, as I think that we'll see large amounts of grappling from either side, especially if they're not able to get that early knockout. But I think that ultimately we'll see Prachnio break away, use his kicks, stay on the outside, and just chip away at William Knight, picking up a decision victory. Again, I lean more so the over 1.5, not with a whole lot of confidence, but I do think that we'll see a large amount of stalemating throughout this matchup. Mainly, maybe William Knight trying to conserve his energy, Prachnio trying to stay away from the big power, but then some grappling situations where Knight might try to get that takedown, try to control Prachnio from on top, but then Prachnio just being too strong and too big, allowing him to get away, get at distance, and get back to that karate-style kicking game from safe distance like he did against Khalil Rountree en route to a decision victory. So give me Marcin Prachnio over 1.5, but more specifically by decision to get his hand raised here. Big boys are on deck here as we got the heavyweight division on display with Josh Parisian coming in at 15-5 and Jamal Pogues making his UFC debut coming in at 9-3. Starting off on the Parisian side, it will always mystify me that he was such a chalky favorite in the early going of his UFC career, but it's taken a couple of opponents now to expose him, and people see that he's really not that good. Like, he has a flashy striking style, and he can land takedowns if he is a better takedown artist than you, but outside of that, not the best gas tank, not the cleanest striking. He's very flashy with his striking when he really shouldn't be, in my opinion, but he can still scrape out wins over bottom of the barrel guys like Alan Baudot or Rocky Martinez. But we've seen the Dontel Mays put him through the ringer. We've seen Parker Porter put together a much better MMA performance and defeat him. It seems like the gas tank of Parisian really is the bane of his existence or the bane of his UFC career, because it seems like when fighters are able to drag fights into deep waters, that's where we just see that effort from him really start to dwindle. Like I said, he's going to beat the Alan Baudos and Rocky Martinez's, but when you're coming up short against guys like Parker Porter and Dontel Mays, that really lets people know what your actual ceiling is like, especially at the highest level in mixed martial arts. On the flip side, for Jamal Pogues, he earned his contract off of a solid 15-minute striking battle on the Contender Series, and I think that was more so a very important for him to go out there and showcase his striking, because he had his first shot on the Contender Series kind of just thrown out by Dana White. Pogues landed numerous takedowns in that fight. I believe it was up to 7 takedowns and controlled his opponent for the majority of that fight. And it was an uninspiring performance that Dana just didn't want to see, so they didn't decide to sign him that night. So Pogues reworked his game, and even on the regional scene still showed off his grapple-heavy style, but he made it a point that he wanted to go out there and strike with his opponent this time around, and he showcased that he could do that, sticking and moving against his opponent, utilizing his range, utilizing his movement to completely outstrike his opponent. He has grid cardio as well, so that he could have fueled that striking heavy approach. But I think now that he's in the UFC, we'll see him go back to that grapple heavy style just because of how surefire it is. He has good takedowns, he has good top control, and he has good enough gas tank to fuel that for 15 minutes if he needs to. And I think over the majority of the mediocre level heavyweights in the UFC, that style is more than enough for him to get his hand raised. So, don't look for Jamal to just stick with that striking style that he had on the Contender Series. Look for him to have some heavy takedowns this weekend and in the future whenever he fights. That's his style. Don't let one performance completely sway you the other way. Let that performance give you confidence that he can choose that approach if he needs it. But the more dominant style and the more reliable style is taking fights to the ground and grinding his opponents out. I'm still, coming to grips with the amount of confidence that I have in Jamal Pogues in this matchup. Like, I like his style of being able to showcase that he can strike from distance, stay on his bicycle, and showcase good enough cardio. But on the regional scene, before his Contender Series fight, he was showcasing more of a grappling style, which I think will be very effective here against Josh Parisian. We saw Parisian struggle against Dontal Mays when Mays was able to get the grappling going. And I think Pogues, if he just goes back to what he did on the regional scene, will be able to grind out Parisian here over 15 minutes and win this fight via decision. I think Pogues has good enough movement and striking to stay away from the big power of Parisian in the early goings of this matchup. And as this fight starts to get into deeper waters, Parisian finds it harder and harder to land on his opponents. And sometimes he overextends, which leaves the takedown opportunities for Pogues to eventually get this fight to the ground. So I like Pogues here. I feel skeptical about how confident I am in him in this spot because this is still, lower to middle level of heavyweights, but I feel like he has the perfect style to beat a guy like Josh Parisian, who's just really not that good. Unless he can get that early knockout or if he can be the one that's landing the better strikes, sure, he might be able to get his hand raised, but I think that Pogues is the better striker here, and I think that Pogues is the far superior grappler in this matchup, where he'll be able to get that top position and really grind on Parisian in this fight. So, I'm going to go Jamal Pogues here, and I think he wins this fight via decision. Next up, we got light heavyweights going at it here with 12-4 Beverly Hills Ninja Jordan Wright going up against 5-1 Zach Pauga. Starting off on the Jordan Wright side of things here. For as much crap as people want to give him, the man's fun. He has a lot of action-packed fights, and even though he hasn't been getting his hand raised as of late, he is still a very fun fighter to watch that a lot of people just like to fade because of his durability issues. But he also has gas tank issues, which is how we saw Dushko Todorovic finish him in his last matchup. But he still has a lot of power. He throws with a lot of speed as well early on in fights, but he just does a horrible job of managing his gas tank, which is why opponents are able to just drown him a little bit later and get him out of there. But even his durability, that is a big question mark. And I think that's kind of going to be, the reason why he is never able to push through that next level of his skill set, because he has that issue. Like, once he gets touched on the button, more often than not, his lights are going to go out, or at least he'll start to get demoralized, start to slow down, and then eventually just lose off of being a broken fighter. I'm surprised the UFC is still giving him another shot, considering the run that he's on right now, but like I said at the top of his breakdown, he is an action-packed fighter that a lot of people enjoy watching, and I think the UFC is very thankful that he's still willing to go out there and, come away on his shield more than anything, while providing a fun performance and a fun fight for a lot of people to get behind. Maybe you get some fight of the night bonuses, some locker room bonuses, whatever it might be, but just for his long-term health and longevity within the sport, probably not the best way to go about it. On the flip side with Zach Pauga, he fell short on the Ultimate Fighter finale, getting knocked out by Muhammad Usman, who's not a big hitter by any means, so it was very surprising to see Pauga go down from a shot like that. But when Pauga is at his best, he utilizes the full MMA game and is able to really put the pressure on his opponents and mix in sneaky takedowns behind his combination striking. He has great cardio for a big boy, especially training over there at Elevation Fight Team in Colorado. He has great training partners, as he's usually with Curtis Blades pretty much every single day, and then obviously a very solid coaching staff as well, headed by Cody Donovan. And the other coach's name is escaping me at this moment in time, so I'm very pissed off at myself because he is a very solid coach as well. But Pauga turns 35 at the end of the month, and very surprised to see the UFC keep him around even after losing his Ultimate Fighter finale fight. But they see something in him that they believe he could offer some good fights, or maybe even have some potential for himself in this light heavyweight division. Look for a solid all-around game from this fighter, especially with a good gas tank to fuel that for 15 minutes if he needs to. And I feel like this is a guy that can really turn up the pace in the latter rounds should he need to. I think he has a couple wins that he can rattle off in the UFC, but I think his ceiling is somewhat capped because of his age, possible durability issues, and just, he does have an overall good game, but I just think the top of the light heavyweight division will be a little bit too much for him. It's tough to have a lot of confidence on the Zach Pauga side here, as he is the better overall fighter. But like seeing what he got put out with by Muhammad Usman, Jordan Wright is absolutely capable of doing the same thing. And Muhammad Usman, as big and intimidating as he looks, he's not a big finisher. You know, if you look through his record, he mainly grinds his opponents out with a volume style, a kickboxing style, or a grinding approach up against the cage. But like he just hit Pauga with a short left hook that didn't seem like it had any sauce on it, and Pauga went out clean. And Jordan Wright, you know, as much as shit as we want to give him, this guy still has big power in his hands that we need to respect. But I think that Pauga has a good enough overall game to stay safe in the early goings of this matchup, whether it's clinching Jordan Wright up against the cage, landing some takedowns, landing combinations from the outside while staying away from the big power. But minus 300 is just a little bit too much for me to want to willingly throw Pauga into parlays or anything like that. I think if you're willing to eat any chalk in this matchup, it should be the violence. You know, the under 2.5 fight doesn't go to decision because Jordan Wright does not do a good job of managing his gas tank, and Pauga, training with the Elevation fight team, training at Elevation, and showcasing that he has good cardio over 15 minutes should he need it, will be able to drag this fight into deep waters and then eventually finish Jordan Wright probably in the second or third round of this matchup. I don't like the 1.5. I do believe that we'll see Pauga be safe in the early goings of this matchup, but I think he'll turn up the heat in the second and third round, eventually getting Jordan Wright out of there by some sort of ground and pound from on top when he gets that dominant full mount position. So let's go Zach Pauga with a late TKO finish over Jordan Wright. Time for the main event of the evening in the flyweight division. We got Jessica Andrade coming in with a 24-9 record, going up against hot prospect Erin Blanchfield, who comes in with a 10-1 record. First off, credit to Jessica Andrade for stepping in on a week's notice here against a highly touted prospect like Erin Blanchfield. This further drives home the point that Andrade is definitely one of those fighters that's anytime, any place, any weight. As we know, she's been jumping up and down from strawweight to flyweight over her last couple fights. Her last fight actually taking place at flyweight less than 3 weeks ago, where she was able to decimate Lauren Murphy over 15 minutes, a fight that could have been stopped on numerous occasions, but for some reason the referee decided to continue allowing Lauren Murphy to take damage, as did Lauren Murphy's corner. That's a discussion for another day, but Jessica Andrade still showcasing that she can go out there and have career best performances even at this stage of her career. She landed 231 significant strikes in that 15-minute matchup, and she also tied Amanda Nunes that night for most wins in women's UFC history with 15. She can actually break it this weekend if she gets her hand raised as well. We know what her style is, right? Hard nose, forward movement, big striking combinations. And although she may not be the most technical by throwing straight shots down the middle, she's been making her wide winging hook style work for her for the majority of her career. You know, it's really only the best women that are beating her at this point of her career. The Valentina Shevchenkos, you know, the Rose Namajunas, the Weili Zhangs. And it's very hard for a lot of opponents or fighters to close that gap between that top 3, top 4 of this division and the rest of the women's UFC roster. I like what Andrade brings to the table, not to mention with her strength as well. When she feels she can take her opponents to the ground and dominate them there, she's able to do that. But she loves moving forward, eating some shots on the chin if she needs to, but her durability has held up to this point, and then letting go with her big strikes on the feet to either knock out her opponent or just break them time and time again as she endlessly crashes the pocket with no fear at all. I love Andrade's style, and she is going to be a tough out for anybody that decides to sign on the dotted line with her, especially a highly touted prospect like Erin Blanchfield. Speaking of Erin Blanchfield, it took 4 fights for her to finally get a main event slot, and it may have came with weird circumstances considering that Marlon Vera versus Corey Sandhagen was supposed to be the headliner for this card. That fight gets pushed back so they can headline in front of a crowd, but still a spot that she is deserving of considering the amount of hype and what kind of prospect she is. She's a fun fighter. You know, it's crazy that she got booed in her last matchup. Being from that New York, New Jersey area, she got booed at MSG. She got booed because she was going up against fan favorite Molly McCann. But I hope that the fans over there are now eating their words and regretting the fact that they booed her, especially considering how much potential she had and how dominantly she defeated Molly McCann, defeating her that night. Her only professional loss came at the hands of Tracy Cortez in a very close fight and at the early parts of their career. But since then, she hasn't looked back. She has showcased a great overall game, but I think she does her best work when she's able to drag fights to the ground. I think her striking still needs a little bit of work, but that's obviously to be expected with a fighter that's still somewhat new and rookie-ish in their career. But Blanchfield has all the tools to be a great fighter. I just don't know if this is the point or the trajectory that she should have been on in terms of getting vaulted into a big spot like this early in her UFC career, not to mention a 5-round fight as well. The only real hiccup we've seen in her game in the UFC thus far was against JJ Aldrich. JJ Aldrich is a fighter a lot of people overlook and, kind of underestimate her skill, but Aldrich is a solid striker, and we saw that she was able to stuff the takedowns of Erin Blanchfield, and she was doing very, very well on the feet until Blanchfield got a hold of her neck and was able to get that submission victory. But up until that point, that heavy chalk on the Erin Blanchfield side was not looking good, but she managed to pull that fight out and get her hand raised. She's still young. She still needs some improvements in her game, and she's going to be able to beat the majority of the women in this division, but there is a clear line dividing the top of the division and the rest of the fighters. And I don't know if Blanchfield is ready for that next step up to take her career to the next level. I think she needs a little bit more grooming. And I think we might end up finding that out this weekend when she goes up against Andrade. Right off the bat, I felt pretty damn confident on the Jessica Andrade side. And, there are some question marks in terms of how Blanchfield will deal with that hard-nosed striking style of Jessica. But I really think it comes down to the strength. And I think that, from what we saw in the JJ Aldrich fight, Erin Blanchfield will struggle with the striking approach of Jessica Andrade. And I think that she'll struggle even more getting this fight to the ground where she could have a little bit of an advantage. And I think that's strength is going to be the ultimate difference maker here. I did tape study the Tyler Santos fight originally and did lean the Tyler Santos side because I thought the strength would play a difference. And I think you're getting an even stronger woman here in Jessica Andrade. Although smaller, she's shown that she's a tank of a human being. And I think that she can get that respect early from Erin Blanchfield with the big power that she can put on her. And I think eventually we'll see Andrade just be too much for Blanchfield, and we'll see Andrade knock her out in the spot. So, I think the veteran experience, I think the hard-nosed striking approach, I think the strength, possibly even the takedown defense and the get-up game from Andrade will keep her safe long enough in this matchup to eventually find that knockout over Blanchfield, maybe in the 3rd or 4th round of this fight. I think the former champ gets her hand raised here, derails the hot streak of Blanchfield, but Blanchfield will be back. She's still young. She has a lot to learn. This will be a valuable experience for her. I do think that Andrade will get her hand raised, though, by knockout. And that's a wrap on the breakdowns. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. As always, appreciate all the love, all the support, hitting that like, hitting that subscribe, seeing the numbers, viewership account, I should say, still being, where it was before, and even more so than it was before is very, very encouraging. Again, I cannot thank you guys enough. I'm very appreciative that I can still continue to do this thing and still get the love and support that I had in the past. Maybe not as much, but still from a YouTube viewership approach, you guys are absolutely killing it. SoundCloud, podcasting, audio, all of that stuff, still killing it. Love you guys. Appreciate you guys. Just a quick reminder, PFL, Fury FC, and LFA breakdowns on the Patreon, starting to drop them later on this evening, and they should be up in full by Wednesday or Thursday of this week. So make sure you guys keep checking that out. A ton of breakdowns coming your way. But again, we are back at it next week as well. I believe for UFC Vegas 70, which is headlined by Nikita Krylov and Ryan Spann. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I hope to continue to stick with these Monday drops for the MMA Lawcast, because I know you guys love getting this information nice and early in the week. You guys are welcome. Appreciate you guys. And I'll see you guys again next week. Peace.